Hello and welcome. I'm Pastor Bobby, lead pastor of Community Fellowship Church here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's our hope that this talk is going to be an encouragement for you on your spiritual journey. We do believe that you can have a spiritual connection with God, a personal connection, and that Jesus is your link to that. It's actually our goal for people at CFC to become committed followers of Christ, and we think these online talks are a great resource for you, but not a replacement for being part of a local community, a church. And so we want to encourage you to be plugged into a church somewhere where you are. But if you're ever in Lancaster, we'd love for you to come and visit us in person at some point. And you're welcome to check out more on our church at our website, communityfellowship.com. Hopefully this talk can be inspiring for you. We hope that you can enjoy it today. If you're visiting, I'm Bobby, and we're glad that you're here today. We prayed today that God would just meet us in this space. I hope you had a good Easter. My brother-in-law was over, and he's an expert sales guy with patio doors, windows, decks, all that stuff. And he said, my patio door is basically junk. And he was like, it doesn't have to cost $3,000. Like, there are some options here. And so he inspired me, and Jen and I, by Monday, we're on our way to the store and got a patio door and threw it on the back of my trailer. And I was going to install that this week. For some reason, on Monday night, I had a sleeping injury. And so my back was killing me. And I was like, why is this happening? And so it actually, when it came, Jen actually asked me at one point, hey, can you lift up that fern and unhitch it? And I was like, no. And that didn't go well. So it was like, I'm just frustrated because I had my idea. I wanted to get this patio door installed this week. And I felt frustrated. I felt impatient. I felt angry. I wanted to complain. And then I felt guilty because I see headlines of the Ukraine and Sudan and Argentina. And then I'm thinking, I'm a pastor and you shouldn't feel this way, right? And so it's just like, I'm frustrated. So anyway, we're going to talk today a little bit about this idea that our disappointments are God's appointments, right? And that it's not always just physical. There's more. So what is God doing through the situations, and what can we learn from them? One CFCer had texted me this week, when my frame of reference is limited to this life, then darkness and despair and hopelessness starts to take over. But if I open up my perspective beyond, then I start to see, and I have more hope, and I start engaging in the vertical connection. I start to see with new eyes. So that's where we're going to hang out a little bit today. It's not just physical. There's more. And in the context of Numbers chapter 20, it's a transitional passage today from the old generation in the wilderness to the new generation. It's the 40th year, guys. It's the 40th year. Things are going to start happening here. And what are the lessons that we're learning along the way? So in verse 1, Numbers chapter 20, the people of Israel come to the wilderness of Zin. It's the first month of that year, and they stayed at Kadesh. What do you remember about Kadesh, guys? Let's bring up the image. Kadesh, number 12 up on the image, was what? It was the El Paso, right? It was the border town heading up into the Promised Land. So things are happening. The chapter starts out with the death of Miriam. So Miriam dies. And at the end of chapter 20, Aaron dies. And so there's this transitional thing there about death. And they've been in the wilderness for 37 years. And there's not a whole lot recorded there. It's kind of been a little bit boring. You don't see a whole lot in that time period. Imagine with the younger generation growing up, and this guy sees a girl, and she's kind of cute. He's kind of cute. You want to go on a date? Yeah. What should we do? Want to sit on a rock? Yeah. There's no movies or restaurant or not a mall or anything. I don't know. It's just boring. It's just such an illustration of if we don't have faith to go into the Promised Land and it's just physical and we're gripped by fear and we're just living in this realm, then you're just biding your time, right? It's just a waste. It's just it feels futile. So let me give you a first example of this idea. It's not just physical and spiritual, because I love the Bible description of death, right? So even in death, when it says when Aaron died, he was gathered to his people. That's a spiritual definition of death. If it's just physical, then what is it? Well, his body's getting crisp here in the sun. It's kind of rotting, and it's just going to die here. It's like death. That's the physical. But the spiritual definition is this beautiful, you are being released from this earth and the trials, and you are being gathered to your people. So I love just even that little nuance there in the description of dying, that it's beautiful. The New Testament calls it falling asleep. So it's not just physical. There's a lot happening even within death. It's the year that Aaron dies, his sister Miriam dies, and then Moses dies in the same year. Moses was 120. Deuteronomy 34 describes Moses' death. They all die in this year, the 40th year. I'm going to talk today about the physical experiences that they had in this 40th year. It's real, it's raw, and there are spiritual lessons. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, if you'll remember, this wilderness experience was an example for us. So there are things here that we can learn from their journey. And they didn't even realize that today, imagine like in 2023, there are people learning from their experiences. They didn't realize that. It's pretty powerful. All right, so verse 2, let's get into the first one. It's the issue of complaining. No water. They assemble themselves together against Moses and Aaron. And the people quarrel with Moses and say, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of blah, 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 verse 5. And why have you made, this is not new, guys. This is a cut and paste from what their parents said 40 years ago. Remember that? Just remember, your kids are listening when you're complaining, right? Like, this generation is growing up and it's like, this is exactly what, they're blaming him 40 years later. You brought us up, it's all you. And they pull up the same complaints and they complain against him. We have no water to drink. Now, in all fairness, my back being tweaked this week is not as bad as dehydration, right? So when you're dehydrating, your mouth gets dry. You start having headaches and dizziness and fever and chills and fatigue, and you have an increased heart rate because there's no nutrition getting to your cells, and your body's literally dying. And if you're like me, you're already thinking about tomorrow, and you can see the vultures circling. You're like, oh, and it starts to own you, right? And so in their defense, it's very real. So, and then the Bible says they assemble themselves against leadership, and they're getting snagged again. This is just a purely physical experience. We need water now. And Exodus 17 was the same description from 40 years ago at the waters of Meribah, where Moses was told to strike a rock. Remember that? Strike the rock. And he did that, and water poured forth. And so let's pause here for a second and say, what is the lesson to be learned here with their complaining? Here's the lesson. Even if you're dying of thirst, buck up and stop your complaining. All right, let's go to the next point. I just thought it was interesting in verse 6 that there's a contrast here between how they complained and how Moses and Aaron complained. Watch this in verse 6. Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly, so they leave the physical story, right? They get to the entrance of the tent of meeting, the presence of God, and they what? They fell on their faces. So if this helps you to remember this, when you're feeling frustrated and like you want to complain, it can be either in your face or on your face. Can you say that? In your face or on your face, right? So the group decides we're going to get in their face and we're going to complain. And so the Bible is not saying just buck up and stop your complaining. In fact, the Bible's full of complaint. Look at Psalm 142, a simple example, right? I pour out my what? My complaint. It's good to complain, but it's directed towards God. I'm crying out to you, God. I'm on my face before you, and I'm reiterating who you say you are. I don't feel like you're my refuge and my portion. I feel stuck out here. I feel like you're checked out. You're busy with other things. I'm dehydrating here, but you say you're my portion, and so I'm going to trust you on that, and I'm going to believe you on that. And so it's interesting how they had misdirected complaining, and they kind of struggled with that rather than saying, God, what are you doing? You are my refuge here. And so Moses and Aaron fall on their face before God, and they choose to put on a different lens, right? So instead of in your face, in the physical realm, they leave the physical story, they come to the presence of God, and they put on a different lens, and they cry out to God. And then it's interesting how God meets them in that place. And he says, I want you to tell the rock to bring forth water. Okay. And so God does that, and you find out there's a beautiful, beautiful lesson here. It's not just physical, it's more than that. Really? Really? Well, what is it? Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock is Christ. Really? So they're learning something deep. Let's get our lens back on again. What is God doing here? I'm dying of thirst. Hold on, before I just complain, let me just back off and bring my complaint to God and say, God, are you trying to teach me a Bible verse? Are you trying to build character here? Is there some eternal purpose, some lesson, some purpose that I don't understand? And here's this incredible lesson that the rock was Christ. The rock is Christ. What does that mean? Do any of you ever get to the place where you are desperately thirsty? You ever yearn or just have this longing, and you're like, something is missing here? And some of you are in scenarios right now that, man, just one more thing and you could just like lose it. You could go off the rails. Some of you have carried burdens in here that are unbelievable. And some of them are just under the surface for you. And all of a sudden there's this lesson here. You put on this lens and you realize, man, I desperately want this living water, but if I'm honest, I'm not really wanting to find it in Jesus. Like I'm finding it in other places, right? And so we have the luxury in our country to be distracted by material things and find it in all other places. And some of us just get lost on our phones and like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to contemplate. I don't want to say what might God be doing. I don't want to pursue Jesus in this. I just want to distract myself. And there's a deep lesson here. What you're going through is more than just physical. God is doing something here, a deep spiritual lesson before they go into the promised land. So there's that complaining issue. And then there's an anger issue that pops up here in verse 10. Moses and Aaron gather the assembly before the rock. And so this is Moses. He says, "Hear now, you rebels! Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff, and water comes out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. Man, this is like Moses is a little out of character here. Normally, like the Bible has said, he's the meekest guy on earth. Like this guy was gentle, and he quarrels with them and engages in the physical quarrel, right? You guys ever were accused of something, and they come and they accuse you, and they say, you did this, and instead of unfocusing your eyes and saying, God, what are you doing here? You just fight back, and you go into the quarrel. And you start name-calling. You rebels, right? You guys ever do name-calling? The reason why name-calling is not a good idea is because people will live up to that name, right? So, fine, if you call me a rebel, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to live up to that. And it's degrading. It doesn't coincide with the idea of someone's dignity, right? So you rebels, putting them down. And then, shall we bring water, as if Moses and Aaron are the ones who are providing the water. So there's a little bit of self-exaltation. And maybe in his mind he had been successful to a certain degree, and he started to believe the lie that he is more than he is, and he starts exalting himself. And maybe subliminally he has this thought, like, I'm better than them. Do any of you have that thought today in the room? Well, at least I'm not like that. Right? we had a great Easter. And, except for the black sheep at the table, but at least I'm not like them. And so there's a little bit of self-exaltation there, and then there's disobedience where God had clearly said, I want you to strike the rock. I want you to talk to the rock, and he strikes it twice. I wonder if God was providing an object lesson at Meribah 40 years ago, Exodus 17. Strike the rock once. The rock is Christ. Christ was struck once on the cross. That's enough. It is finished. That's the object lesson. And now Moses disobeys God and strikes it again when he was told clearly, just talk to the rock. Don't strike the rock. The rock was struck once. And it's just interesting how he doesn't follow through with the instructions and gets dragged into the physical scenario. And the result in verse 12 is that because you didn't believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people, that's what's happening when you and I get snagged by the physical around us, that as soon as a scenario happens, you right away get dragged into the physical. And what that says is I'm not really living in faith right now. I'm not really believing that God is my portion. I've got to fix this. It's physical. It's a physical thing, right? And so because you didn't believe to uphold me in the eyes of the people, so he, as the leader, he did this in front of all the people. And that's why God says you're not going to be able to bring them into the promised land. When I read that, it was hard. I teared up because I thought, man, he's stood in for them. He's been gracious. He's been faithful this whole time. And then he failed in that. And so I was wondering, is that harsh? But on one sense, he was the leader, and it was a public object lesson. Imagine the ripple effect of the whole nation hearing, wow, Moses lost his cool, he disobeyed God, and he's not going to cross the finish line with us. Imagine the powerful object lesson for the others who observed that, and how they're like, guys, we're the new generation. We need to get this right. Powerful object lesson. And then I love the grace of God that Moses does actually get to go into the promised land. He shows up on the Mount of Transfiguration. You guys remember that experience when Moses in his new body shows up? And so in a way, God is saying, listen, Moses, I'm going to spare you the burden of the conquest. I'm going to gather you to myself now. And he still gets to go into the promised land later on. I thought that was gracious. All right, so we've talked about misdirected complaint. We've talked about misdirected anger. What if Moses had done this when he got angry? What if he had done this? I just feel so angry right now, God. And you know that I'm a stuffer. And that in Egypt, when I killed that Egyptian, I let anger get the best of me. Help me to deal with this anger. What are you doing here, God? What are you teaching me in my character? And if he had just put his lens on, right? There are natural consequences for our decisions. Okay. Let's continue with the story of transition. They get to Edom. I don't know if we can throw the map up there. Well, let's read the verse. From Kadesh, they go east. Edom is there, the nation of Edom. This is Esau. You guys remember Jacob and Esau? So Edom or Esau is the biblical representation of just living according to your flesh. So Esau is the illustration of the guy in the Bible who was overcome with hunger, and he just sold out his birthright. He was just letting himself be led by his appetites, right? And God still provided a land for him. But Edom heard that Israel was coming up, had heard all about their hardship, and all that Moses was saying is just, let us go through on the King's Highway. Now, that was a highway that went from the Gulf of Aqaba in the Red Sea, that little number 11 you can see up there. There was a King's Highway that went up the east side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee all the way up to Damascus, right? So we're just going to get on the king's highway, and we won't take of your resources. Let us just pass. So Edom comes out against, in verse 20, with a large army to hold them back, and Israel has to turn back south again. Frustrating. So then they decide to try the west side to go up into Canaan, and the Canaanite king comes against them and fights them and takes some of them captive, and they cry out to God, and God provides the ability for them to recapture their people. And so in verse 4, chapter 21, we now get to the third issue, the issue of impatience. So we've had complaining, we've had anger, and now there's impatience. So from Mount Hor, they set out by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Eden, and the people became impatient. So what is that? That Hebrew word is katsar, and it means to be short, to be vexed, and to be grieved, all in one. Katsar. So it's more than just impatient. I am vexed. I'm grieving the loss of the dream. It's beyond my reach. And I'm short, so don't mess with me right now. I'm hangry. I don't want to talk about this, right? And it's just like, you can just feel the weight of it. They're trying to get up into the promised land, and it's not working. It's not working. And so they become impatient, and they hit the natural default of what they learned from their parents and bring up the fact that the manna that's falling on the ground is worthless. We loathe this worthless food. Now remember we went through a whole theological study on manna. Remember that? Remember the Krispy Kreme donuts? And remember the combination of how nutritious they are? And that in Deuteronomy chapter 8, the Bible says their feet didn't swell. In other words, they had all the nutrition they needed. It's not worthless food, but we don't see things as they are, right? We see things as we are, right? They're not, God has provided their clothing isn't wearing out, their shoes aren't wearing out, but they're not able to see things as they are because of their own condition, the condition in their own heart. And so they wrestle with that. And put on your lens, Israel. Hold on a second, is this just worthless food? No, it's not. And why have we not been able to go up the east side or the west side? Okay, what is God doing? What lesson is he teaching us? What character development? God, is there some eternal purpose in this? Is there some principle or scripture that you're teaching us? No. They go against Moses again. It's the 8th record of grumbling. Verse 8. God says to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Why? Because God sent venomous snakes in as a repercussion. Why venomous snakes? Remember the serpent in the garden and how that Eve was discontent with her circumstances? Blessed of God and yet discontent. And so, I don't know, I feel this way. I can feel so blessed and have, see the headlines in other countries and be like, wow, that's got to be hard, and still feel the frustration and the complaining. I don't know if you're this way. I'm like, what is wrong with me? And it's that, I think I've inherited that from Adam and Eve, that I have God's blessing, and there's that one thing, if I could only have that, right? Or remember, I want to be like the Joneses. You start comparing, and if only I could have that. And so, oh yeah, you want that? I'm going to send the serpent again, these venomous snakes, and we've got an object lesson for you here. They start crying out, and people are poisoned and bitten. And so God tells Moses to make a serpent of bronze. Okay, so bronze is the symbol of judgment or justice, the bronze altar, the feet of bronze, Jesus. So here's a symbol of justice, and I'm going to put this serpent up here for everyone to see, okay? And we're going to remind you that the first serpent undermined the goodness of God, and you are physically affected by the venom of this serpent, but raise your eyes. It's not just a physical thing. Raise your eyes, and you will find the salvation of God. Okay, so there's an object lesson in here. It's not just physical. There's an object lesson. God is teaching me something here through this lesson. I don't know if some of you can remember John chapter 3 when Nicodemus came at night and he said, hey, Jesus said to him, you've got to be born again, remember? And Nicodemus was like, how can I be born again? How can I re-enter my mother's womb? And that's when Jesus said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. It's like almost the core central message of the good news. You can be born again. It's just amazing to see what God is providing. And guess what? They didn't know that 1,500 years earlier, they were part of a huge object lesson for us. Jesus is your salvation. So as I was reading this CFC, I was like, this is not cool. 3 for 3. I don't know that this generation is going in the promised land. They're still misdirecting their complaints and their anger and their impatience. They're still kind of mismanaging that part. And so you're reading and you're like, how's this going to work out? We're going to go another 40 years and it's going to be the next generation. Or we're like, what's going to happen here? And I was kind of curious. And so verse 10, I started reading, and they're literally stuck in no man's land. Stuck. And they're going from one remote place, a place called Oboth. Have any of you ever been to Oboth? I don't know where that is, right? Or Abarim, or the valley of Zered, Arnon, Matana, Nahaliel, Bamoth in Moab, I don't know. They're tired, they're thirsty, they're frustrated, they're angry, they're enduring, they're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting. The pillar moves again, they move again. You want to go on a date? Let's sit on a rock. When is this going to end? When is this going to end? And they get to this place called beer. Who knew there's a brewery in this? It's like, this is amazing. So I looked up, like, what does that mean in Hebrew? And it just means well. They came to a well. And do you notice in this narrative that there was no complaining against Moses or anyone? They just kind of have said, hey, we're just going to endure. We're going through this. We're waiting on God. And maybe some of them had changed their lens, and some of them were like, wow, there was a powerful spiritual lesson, and I was healed by just looking to the serpent. I need to start looking to Jesus. I need to start trusting him more. And maybe they're learning through this to put on that lens. And so they get to this fountain, and all of a sudden they just break out in worship. Spring up, oh well, and they start singing. And then in chapter 21, there's this whole song in there where they're worshiping God. They're worshiping him as their provider. All of a sudden it flipped, right? Instead of mismanaged complaining and suffering for that, they endure, they wait, and then God provides in the nick of time. God just provides an answer in his perfect timing. Wow, Jesus becomes their living water, right? And you'll notice in the passage, from then on, they move forward, and it's just victory, victory, victory. They actually go up the east side, and they start having victory against the Amorites and against Og. Who's Og? I don't know who Og is. He's the king of Bashan. I just know that he was huge. He had like 2 king-size mattresses for his bed, is what the Bible says. This guy his bed was 13 feet by 6 feet wide. And they have victory over the king of Bashan. His name is Og. Wow. There's some transformation that happened there. I want to close with John 7. If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. CFC, this is a powerful lesson. Are you thirsty, right? This is so important that I don't know what you do when you go to bed at night and you start rehearsing the day and maybe you're frustrated with the day. It's that moment in the evening when you're tired. You guys, I'm not tired enough to fall asleep yet, but I don't feel like I can produce anything right here. And so what do a lot of us do? We just start scrolling through our phones or watching television or whatever. And if you were to take the time to just admit, I'm actually thirsty for God, and this day kind of sucked. Like I was a worse version of myself today. But Jesus, I've put my faith in you. I believe in you. And there's some sort of a resource with your spirit, like living water, if I trust you. So just help me in this. So here's a resource for you. And you can either take a picture of this or you can get on our website. The media and the notes it's there. So this is where you could go, is you could just say, all right, God, I'm looking back on the day, and I just want to take a few moments to be silent with you. And I want to ask you to come into my thinking and reflect on the moments of this day, and I just want to thank you for, and then you fill in the blanks. And when I look back, CFC, my patio door is installed, and I thank God for my neighbor and for my son. They helped me. I brought the old patio door to the dump, and a CFCer was at the dump, and he said, you can dump it for free. And I just felt like God came and ministered. So give thanks. Give thanks for the things you see. And then confess, God, did I have some wrong attitudes today? And if you did, then express your willingness to make that right. You know, we confess in church, but really spiritual maturity is to go to those whom we have harmed and to have that conversation and say, you know what? I mismanaged my impatience and my anger and my complaining. I wonder if you would be willing to forgive me. I want to grow in that. And then to seek spiritual friendship and talk to somebody, a trusted person, about what you're discovering. And so, God, I just pray that you would help us as a church body to stop distracting ourselves, and then when things don't go our way, that we just get snagged thinking, oh, it's just physical, I just have to fix this. I just have to fix this so I feel better. But to take times in the evening to reflect. What character are you developing in me, God? What object lesson? How are you using this for eternal purposes? What scripture do you want to show me in this? And Lord, I just pray that as a church body that you would take us beyond getting snagged in the physical scenarios and allowing the darkness to break in on us, to feel despair and hopelessness, and to be able to unfocus our eyes and put on that different lens and to say, God, what are you doing here? Show me. Teach me. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would complete this message in our hearts. I pray for revelation, that you would